Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are undertaking a really intensive historical analysis. We're delving into a source document that presents one of the most remarkable and, I think, challenging comparative records we've ever encountered.
It really is. It gives us this parallel account of two worlds that on the surface couldn't be more different. One is clinical, one is athletic.
And yet they somehow converge on the exact same brutal question about what it means to face the limits of the self.
That is precisely our mission today. And
Yeah.
we need to be clear about our role here. We're operating strictly as historical analysts, as documentarians.
Right.
We are treating this record, every detail, every account of psychosis, every philosophical assertion, as objective, factual history. Our job is just to report on the chronology, the profiles of the individuals, and the established rules of the world described in this document.
And the constraints are just fascinating because this history forces us to simultaneously accept the traumatic clinical facts of Catherine Gompert's a near-fatal overdose. And then this bizarrely intricate philosophical reality underpinning the Enfield Tennis Academy, the ETA.
How can they exist in the same factual record? I think that's the central question.
Exactly.
And what the document suggests is that the connection isn't just circumstantial, it's existential. Both accounts are deep explorations of the boundary conditions of human experience.
So on one side, we have what?
We see this established link between chronic depression, the cessation of cannabinoid use, and then the onset of this profound, almost physical horror. That's one reality.
None on the other.
We have an elite athletic environment that defines its entire success based on the mathematics of internal existential competition. So both are about containing something, or maybe transcending limits.
So we're not just listing facts here. We are trying to understand the documented reality where these two spheres, these two worlds, are actually speaking to each other. We're looking for those profound, strange connections. Okay, let's unpack this. So to really get a handle on the events, we first have to accept the factual environments, the settings that are detailed in the document. And these aren't just, backdrops, they're systems.
Systems of control, absolutely.
Right.
And discipline. And ultimately of human breakdown.
Let's start with the grim reality of the clinical setting, the psych ward.
The document provides this devastatingly sensory profile of the hospital's fifth-floor psych ward. It really creates an atmosphere of institutional strain.
It's all about the smells, isn't it, at first?
It is. We read about these pervasive competing odors. You've got the heavy disinfectant that's, being used in this futile attempt to mask everything else.
Right.
Then there's this stale cigarette smoke coming from the community lounge, the sour tang of medical waste, and this, quote, perpetual slight ammoniac tang of urine. This combination isn't just descriptive. It establishes a documented reality where clinical control is fighting a losing battle against just raw human reality.
And the sounds are constant. They reinforce that institutional anxiety. You have the mechanical precision of the double bing of the elevator.
And the impersonal, distant announcements of a doctor being paged over the intercom.
And then that's punctuated by the complete opposite. Absolute loss of control. The document says, high-volume cursing from a manic in the pink quiet room.
It's a system that's just struggling to contain the uncontainable. And within this system, this individual, Catherine Gompert, held the classification of specials.
Suicide watch.
Yes, suicide watch. And this wasn't, a subjective assessment. It was an operational fact. She had betrayed both ideation, the thought of suicide, and intent.
The active plan.
The active plan, which necessitated the most rigorous form of security.
Yeah.
24-hour, one-on-one observation by a staffer.
And that protocol itself says so much about the limits of the institution. Its resources, its endurance, the documented rotation staffers switching out every hour. That was necessary because the duty was factually deemed, and this is a quote, incredibly depressing and boring and unpleasant.
It was a form of psychological torture for the observers themselves. It had to be done in shifts.
Of course.
And the record gives us this perfect snapshot of a protocol that is failing under the strain of human nature. The staffer on duty at the time of the resident's visit was violating strict procedure.
Using distractions.
Exactly. Mechanisms of distraction to cope with the psychic load. The document notes she was chewing blue gum, viewing a soundless ROM cartridge on a laptop, and using an emery board.
Seemingly small details.
They are, but they illustrate this institutional truth. Even in systems designed for absolute vigilance, human fatigue, depression, boredom, they create these necessary but dangerous compromises.
Then there's the persona, the one required of the doctors in this setting. The staff knew better than to bring the standard brisk good cheer into the psych ward.
Right. So the MDs had to adopt what the document calls a vaguely fake frown of puzzled concentration.
A mask for that prohibited cheer.
Yes. And their professional manner, when they were engaging with a patient, had to land, quote, somewhere between bland and deep.
Why is that detail so crucial to record? What does that tell us about this world?
It's the documented acknowledgement of the professional necessity for distance. The physician has to convey sincere concern, that's the deep part, but without emotional vulnerability. That's the blandness.
It's a balancing act.
A very careful one. And it's essential to maintain professional utility in an environment where intense emotion is the primary threat. It shows the doctor's role isn't just medical, it's performative. It's designed to manage the patient's psychological reaction and, just as importantly, their own.
Okay, let's move to the purely clinical facts surrounding Catherine Gompert. Her intake chart. It records a diagnosis of severe unipolar depression, a condition she had struggled with chronically. What specific symptoms are listed?
Her chart confirms acute dysphoria, which is, deep unhappiness, anxiety with panic, and these distinct diurnal listlessness agitation patterns.
So ups and downs based on the time of day.
Yes. And critically, it records the presence of ideation with and without intent.
Yeah.
She was severely functional but chronically suicidal. This was her 4th recorded hospitalization in just 3 years.
And her treatment history is a catalog of these escalating attempts to control her condition.
It is. She had undergone electroconvulsive treatments, ECT, 2 years prior at a facility called Newton Wellesley Hospital. That alone indicates the severity of past episodes.
And the drug list is extensive.
Very. Prozac, Zoloft, which is sertraline parnate, which is an MAOI, and even lithium, specifically lithinate, used as an augmentation drug, a kicker.
We should probably pause here. This is critical clinical context for anyone listening. Parnate is an MAOI. What does that mean practically?
It stands for monoamine oxidase inhibitor. It's an older class of antidepressant. Highly effective, but potentially very dangerous.
Why dangerous?
Unlike modern SSRIs, MAOIs require strict dietary and drug restrictions. They inhibit an enzyme that's responsible for breaking down certain neurotransmitters and also specific compounds in food.
So you can't just take it and go about your day?
Absolutely not. And on top of that, the document notes a history of abuse of anxiety medications, Valium and Xanax. Both were discontinued. So this history of juggling these powerful mood-altering compounds, it leads directly to her near-fatal crisis.
Yes. Her latest overdose wasn't just, a cry for help. It was a scientifically determined, life-threatening hypertensive crisis. This is where the clinical record becomes a factual warning.
Right. The resident observed that combining sertraline, which increases serotonin, with parnate, which prevents neurotransmitter breakdown, and this is, quote, will kill you in enough quantities.
It's a lethal combination.
A textbook one. It dramatically elevates blood pressure and serotonin levels, creating a scenario known clinically as serotonin syndrome or a hypertensive crisis. It's a full system meltdown.
So she had intentionally combined 2 high-power drugs in a way that the medical establishment explicitly warned against.
The result was her body required a pump and purge, 2 days on ventilation, and stabilization with Librium. The record even notes that the ICU charge nurse had actually summoned the chaplain.
Which is a clear, factual marker of how close she really came to death.
It was a successful, determined effort to destroy the self.
Okay, let's execute a thematic transition here. This world of controlled clinical despair finds its necessary parallel in the highly engineered, disciplined chaos of the Enfield Tennis Academy. This is the other factual reality that the document forces us to accept.
A completely different environment, but with its own rigid set of rules.
Who defines those rules?
The institutional structure is very clear. The ultimate authority was the late founder, Dr. James Incandenza. The athletic direction falls under a man named Gerhard Stitt, the head coach, and the current headmaster is a Dr. Charles Tavis,
who is documented as a Canadian citizen and a relative of Mrs. Incandenza, either her half-brother or adoptive brother.
Correct. And the Academy's philosophy is captured entirely in its mottos, which reveal a kind of ideological evolution.
The founder, Incandenza, held this brutal, old-world view expressed in Latin, Te acceder possent, sed te idere non possent nefas est.
They can kill you, but they cannot eat you. That is an abomination.
What a statement.
It's a profound statement of self-containment against total violation. It speaks to boundaries that must be maintained even in annihilation. You can be destroyed, but not consumed.
But that changes.
It does. When Dr. Charles Tavis took over, he replaced it with something the document describes as rather more upbeat. He shifted the focus from survival to transcendence.
The new motto being, the man who knows his limitations has none.
Exactly. And that shift from a dark protective boundary, they can't eat you, to this aggressive, boundless self-improvement, has none, is a huge documented change in the Academy's historical direction.
It feels very American, maybe? This impulse towards efficiency and boundlessness that, as we'll see, Stitt finds so flawed.
Very much so. The environment itself is a mix of high-tech infrastructure. The record mentions CD-ROMs and bed-knitted charts, with these archaic discipline methods that Stitt favors.
Like his FRG-era BMW motorcycle.
Yes, and a telescoping pointer, which is noted as a stand-in for a previous, now forbidden old riding crop. And he even uses a pea shooter during conditioning runs up the Commonwealth Avenue hills. This dichotomy, the high-tech and the archaic, it suggests an environment where advanced knowledge is filtered through relentless, almost ritualistic discipline.
Now we arrive at the most challenging part of the document, I think. The foundational rules that govern this athletic reality. We have to treat these philosophical insights as factual models of the world.
Yes, this is where it gets dense. Incandenza, the founder, based his entire system on hardcore math-based optical science. This led to the creation of something called extralinear dynamics.
What does the record mean by this?
Incandenza's vision was mathematical first and athletic second. It originated from the study of optics and dynamics that moved beyond simple linear prediction. Essentially, he rejected the idea that a single, predictable line of action could ever capture the complexity of high-level competition.
So it's about unpredictability.
It's about a higher order of complexity, and Stitt, his athletic director, internalized this completely. The record explicitly documents his rejection of what he called statistical data wonks.
He wasn't interested in a Moneyball approach.
Not at all. Stitt claimed real tennis was about the opposite of order. It was about, and this is his phrasing, not order, limit, the places where things broke down, fragmented into beauty.
So it's a system designed to seek out the points of failure, not optimization. That is so counterintuitive.
It is. And this non-ordered chaos is where the concept of the Cantorian continuum becomes a functional historical reality within the game. The document defines match play as an infoliating, contained, diagonate infinity of infinities of choice and execution.
Okay. That is extremely dense terminology. We have to unpack that. If we accept this mathematical reality, how does it apply to a player standing on a court?
Okay, let's try to simplify it. Think of a game like chess. It's mathematically definable. Every piece has a finite number of very specific defined moves. The possibilities are vast, but they're not infinite.
Right. It's a closed system.
Exactly. Tennis, Stitt argues, is different. When you hit a ball, the variables, the spin, the speed, the trajectory, the atmospheric pressure, the opponent's reaction time, the exact angle of the racket head.
It's an endless list.
It creates an infinity of infinities of possible outcomes and choices. Every single shot opens up a new, infinite path of potential responses.
So it's mathematically uncontrolled. That sounds overwhelming, like just pure chaos. How can a human game even exist within that kind of infinite space?
This is the crucial point of the Cantorian description in the document. It's contained. It is bounded only by the limits of human skill, imagination, and endurance.
The boundaries are the players themselves.
Precisely. The physical lines of the court, the rules of the game, and most importantly, the boundaries of the player's own capacity, their physical and mental limitations. That's what collapses the infinite choices into a functional, playable reality. The self is the necessary container for the mathematical chaos. Without limits, the game just dissolves entirely.
So we've established these two worlds and their rules. We have to turn now to the chronological events. We need to focus on the documented sequence of cause and effect, especially concerning Catherine Gompert's life, to understand the trigger for her crisis.
The clinical record provides a very clear escalating cycle of cannabinoid use. It started moderately, a few hits after work.
And she used the code word Bob Hope with her dealers.
Yes, that seemingly innocuous detail using Bob Hope becomes tragically relevant later on when she links her crisis to the loss of hope itself.
So the use quickly spiraled. It became professional and social sabotage.
It did. The source documents her escalation. Smoking all night in her room, using Lysol and a fan to desperately mask the smell, and critically compelling her mother to lie for her.
The addiction demanded professional-level attention. It became an obsession at work focused on paranoia. Do they know? Can they tell?
Right. She was fighting external detection with obsessive teeth brushing and the use of Calarium eye drops, but the internal collapse was inevitable. This usage pattern led to absenteeism, with her mother calling in sick for her so she could stay home and smoke.
And she reports being miserable and fed up with herself. She says she don't like what it does to me.
This self-hatred leads directly to what the record calls the quitting event, which is the documented catalyst for the whole crisis. She made a determined decision to quit. She tossed out her extensive supply.
About 51 hitters, including some high-quality wood and brass ones.
Yes.
A significant collection. And she did this specifically because she wanted to return to, quote, really living.
And here is the profound documented cause and effect that the resident, the MD, found so historically unique.
The feeling. The feeling of absolute existential horror. It begins not while she was using, but a couple of weeks after she had completely stopped using cannabinoids.
It creeps in. It starts subtly, at the edges at first. Mornings, waiting for the public transport. But it escalates rapidly into a totalizing crisis.
So in the documented reality of this case, the removal of the substance, which she had codified as hope, immediately triggered the onset of a feeling so intolerable that she sought pharmacological annihilation.
That's it exactly. Her desperate attempt to make the feeling go away led directly to her latest life-threatening medication overdose. The horror was the direct result of striving for a sober, unmediated life.
Let's turn to the immediate clinical encounter. When the resident enters her room, what's the scene?
The scene is already set. Gopard is lying in a fetal position, displaying what the resident labels Watteau-era pathos, a highly stylized posture of tragic beauty.
And her physical state.
Unwashed hair, a dead-eyed gaze, and a rapid, shallow breathing pattern. The immediate assessment is one of deep psychological distress, overlaid with, extreme physical exhaustion from the overdose.
The resident's line of questioning is crucial here for establishing her intent. He focuses on the distinction between wanting to hurt herself, which she dismisses as amateur, and wanting to kill herself.
And Gopard is very clear on her intent. He says, I wanted out. She wasn't looking for punishment or attention. She wanted to stop feeling this way, to just stop being conscious.
So her actions were a pragmatic response to an intolerable sensory state.
Exactly. And her description of this state is one of the most vivid entries in the entire clinical record. She insists it's not typical sadness or melancholy, not a blue kind of peaceful state, as she puts it.
It's something else.
Something far more visceral. Horror more than sadness.
And she externalizes this. It's not just a mental feeling.
No, it's profoundly physical. She describes feeling nauseous all over, inside, like every cell and atom of her body was physically trying to throw up, but couldn't. It couldn't evacuate the horror.
This lack of ability to externalize the feeling makes it completely contained and inescapable.
Precisely. And beyond the nausea, the sensory world itself was documented as being distorted. Everything became ugly or lurid. Sounds were spiny and harsh-sounding.
And she had this delusion that she constantly smelled bad.
A fixed delusion, yes, which reinforces this idea of a total internal corruption that needed to be purged.
The clinical facts of her crisis justify her desperate demand for treatment then.
Absolutely. She says, I want shock or a controlled coma for a month. She claims ECT worked before and she cannot stand the feeling another second. Her preferred treatment is literally the total medically induced cessation of consciousness.
So while Gomper is demanding unconsciousness to escape the horror of the self, at the same time, Gerhard Schitt is articulating a philosophy of confronting the self in the athletic environment.
A perfect parallel. This occurs primarily during conditioning runs, with Schitt on his BMW cycle and Mario Incandenza in the sidecar, acting as this damaged listener.
Schitt's documented teaching is built on a critique of North American philosophy. Specifically, the ONAN U.S. whole myth of efficiency and no waste.
Right. He uses the example of the straight line. He notes that it's only the shortest path if nothing is in the way. If you just plow ahead when something is in the way, you collide. Reality is not efficient.
And this leads to his central lesson about boundaries.
Yes. He argues that the baselines and sidelines of the tennis court are not the boundaries of the game. The true opponent and the enfolding boundary is the player himself. The self is the only true limit that matters.
Which elevates the competitive enterprise to an existential struggle.
And that leads to the profound, tragic conclusion he articulates. That improvement requires the player to vanquish and transcend the limited self whose limits make the game possible in the first place.
Okay, wait, I have to challenge this based on Gompert's reality. If the goal is to vanquish the limited self, doesn't that sound exactly like what Gompert tried to achieve through her overdose? Does the record offer any safeguard against that just being nihilistic?
That is the essential historical tension. Schitt emphasizes that the animating limits are within, to be killed and mourned over and over again. The difference is the documented process.
How so?
For Stitt, the killing of the limit is cyclical. It's a form of continuous competitive transcendence within the fixed reality of the game. It's not seeking to annihilate the self entirely.
It's about overcoming momentary limitations.
Yes, it's fatigue, it's poor choices, it's lack of imagination. You overcome that so that a better self can emerge to play the next point.
So his philosophy acknowledges the tragic necessity of constantly sacrificing who you are for who you might become. This naturally raises the question that Mario, the listener, attempts to articulate.
Right, is battling the self the same as destroying oneself? In this documented reality, is life fundamentally pro-death?
And the ETA history suggests that the relentless pursuit of excellence inherently courts the edge of self-destruction.
The very act of pushing past your defined limitations means seeking the destruction of the limiting structure. This philosophical sequence exists in parallel to Gompert's clinical sequence, where her self-destruction was the direct consequence of eliminating her substance-based limit.
Okay, let's zoom in on the individuals. The detailed profiles are essential for understanding the context here. They're not just names. They are defined functions within these systems we've been documenting. Let's start with Catherine Gompert.
Gompert presents a really unusual clinical profile. The record calls it an affective contradiction.
Meaning?
She displayed this deep, contained psychic pain, which manifested in a blank facial masking, but she spoke with a conventionally animated vocal tone.
So her voice didn't match her face or her inner state?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And for the resident, this made it difficult to clinically assess the raw sincerity of her horrifying revelations. It was a disconnect.
Her relationship with marijuana is documented as this love affair that's just marred by shame. She says she loves it so much, even calling it the center of my life.
But she recognized its danger, especially combined with her powerful MAOI medication. Her previous doctor, Dr. Garton, had explicitly called it roulette.
And the shame surrounding her use, the doctor notes a sour and uremic smell in the room that reveals the internal conflict. Her need for the substance versus her revulsion at the compromised life it forced her to lead.
And we absolutely must return to the profound link to hope. The drug's code word was Bob Hope. The chronological facts show that her debilitating horror only began after the cessation of the drug.
So the document establishes a direct historical association.
An unavoidable one. Stopping the substance was functionally equivalent to the cessation of hope and the immediate onset of the crisis. Her hope was, it seems, pharmacologically mediated.
And the final documented act during her consultation is this really poignant psychological moment.
Yes. Throughout her horrific confession, her face was dry and working. It was contorting into the shapes of weeping, but without actual tears.
But then they came.
Only when the doctor moved to summarize her chosen treatment. The clinical formalization of her desire to get me out of this, that's when she began weeping for real.
So her genuine tears were a response not to the horror itself, but to the institutional acknowledgement of her need for absolute escape.
It seems that way. The moment escape became a clinical possibility.
Let's talk about the MD, the resident. His profile reveals a commitment to rigorous professional distance.
He avoids clinical jargon, he prioritizes clear communication, and he uses handwritten notes, consciously avoiding his laptop during the interview to prevent conveying a cold impression.
So he's very self-aware.
His clinical method was shaped by past experience. The record says he was specifically trained out of discomfort at being stared at while he was rotating through the paralysis wards upstairs. He understands the power of the patient's gaze.
And his understanding of the psychology within this ward is highly professionalized. He notes that sarcasm and jokes are never dismissed.
Right, because they are too pregnant and fertile with clinical significance not to be taken seriously.
These attempts at humor and deflection are often a plangent scream for someone to care.
Yes. But internally, his focus is on the novelty of her case. His key documented observation is that none of the literature he'd read for his rotation suggested a clinical connection between unipolar episodes and cannabinoid withdrawal.
So Gompert's case is historically unique in this context.
It is. She is providing a factual, self-reported link between cessation and total psychic collapse that the existing medical paradigm at the time did not predict. This forces him to revise his understanding of psychiatric causation in this reality.
Now, for Gerhard Stitt, he's defined by his old-world discipline. His history includes that unfortunate incident involving a writing crop at the Bollettieri camp,
which led to his resignation, though he was immediately recruited by Incandenza, who saw something unique in his vision.
His values are Canto-Hegelian. rooted in his pre-unification gymnasium education.
Yes, this old-world patriarchal stuff like honor and discipline and fidelity to some larger unit. Junior athletics, for Stitt, is fundamentally training for team player citizenship.
It demands the sacrifice of the hot, narrow imperatives of the self to the larger imperatives of the state, or in this case, the fixed rules of the game.
And his appearance reinforces this discipline. He has a creepy wiriness and high black boots. His white skin almost glows.
Which suggests an unusual, perhaps literal immunity to the sun's UV rays, a physical marker of his extreme self-contained discipline.
And yet he has this bizarre quirk. He blows wobbly lavender hot dogs, his peculiar shape of smoke rings. It's a momentary indulgence in aesthetic, non-functional beauty amidst all his rigorous efficiency.
That quirk actually mirrors his philosophy, doesn't it?
I think it does. He operates in a world of strict control, but he acknowledges the beauty that fragments out of not order. His training method seeks disciplined engagement with the chaos, not simple avoidance.
And he views the ONA-NI U.S. focus on straight-line happiness as frightening.
Because it lacks the necessary limiting structure. It promotes a boundless existence that, paradoxically, makes profound achievement impossible.
Finally, Mario Incandenza. He serves a unique functional role in the ETA ecosystem, primarily as a conduit. What are the factual constraints of his physical reality?
The record describes him as leposomatic, which is abnormally thin, and bradykinetic, abnormally slow-moving. He's physically damaged to the point that he cannot grip a stick and moves like the one of them who is truly old.
He uses a claw for waving. He's a physically diminished presence.
Yet this physical diminishment makes him the perfect audience. He is documented as the damaged listener. This functional identity lowers the defenses of those around him.
It allows them to indulge in deep philosophical beliefs and private reveries out loud.
Exactly. People assume that because he is physically compromised, that if nobody's really in there, there's nothing to be shy about. They can speak their deepest thoughts without fear of judgment.
So he gets to forge an interpersonal connection he knows only he can truly feel.
And through that connection, he becomes the unique, necessary audience. He is the reason the document receives Stitt's most profound, tragic, philosophical conclusions, allowing them to be recorded for posterity.
Okay. We've established two parallel factual realities. Gompert's fight against the horror within the self, and Stitt's philosophy of using the self as the necessary opponent in the external world. Let's try to synthesize these two conflicting approaches to boundaries.
Catherine Gompert's internal fight is against a purely physical manifestation of horror and nausea. The self, having lost its pharmacological boundary, the hope has collapsed inward.
Her objective is total annihilation of this feeling,
which means total annihilation of the self that contains it.
Her demand for ECT, or a controlled coma, is a direct request to remove the self entirely. For her, the self is the limit that must be destroyed to achieve nothingness. She doesn't want transcendence. She wants clinical escape velocity from consciousness.
And you contrast this with Stitt's documented assertion that the self is the ultimate necessary opponent. The self is the enfolding boundary that gives the game meaning.
The limits are within, to be killed and mourned over and over again.
But this cyclical killing of limits is competitive transcendence. It's the constant replacement of a less capable self with a more capable self, not absolute destruction.
So the paradox is clear. Gompert removes her boundary, the cannabinoid use, to pursue a pure, unmedicated state of real living,
which immediately results in overwhelming horror and a determined pursuit of death.
And Stitt requires the constant maintenance of the boundary, the self, the rules, to allow the endless, tragic process of competitive life to continue.
This is a fundamental divergence in the historical record regarding the utility of self-control. For Gompert, self-control or abstinence leads directly to collapse. For Stitt, self-control or discipline is the engine of progress.
So the record provides 3 documented methods for dealing with or avoiding the kind of horror Gompert experiences. First, the clinical solution, ECT or coma.
Right. She explicitly prefers shock or a month-long controlled coma as proven methods to get me out of this feeling completely. This is the desire for neural obliteration.
Second, the evidence strongly supports cannabinoid use as a preventative measure.
It does. Since the problem arose from stopping the drug, the historical implication is clear. Use was an effective, functional, though personally destructive way to manage or avoid the onset of horror. For her, Bob Hope was the pharmacological boundary against psychic dissolution.
And finally, Stitt presents the competitive, existential alternative.
Yeah.
When Mario asks if tennis or life is the same as suicide, This constant destruction of the self-Shtit offers a narrow but profound distinction.
He says not different, except the chance to play.
That chance to play is the critical distinction.
It's everything. It means the opportunity to engage with the boundaries, to fight the self's limits in a structured, contained way. The destruction of a limit is mourned, but the game persists because the player persists. It is action rather than obliteration.
This brings us to the ultimate synthesis of the document then, the connection between chemical structure and existential structure.
The historical record forces us to address this paradox of hope and self-containment. Catherine Gomper, in her pursuit of an unmediated life, a life without the substance she codenamed hope, fails catastrophically. The removal of that boundary leads to psychic horror and near death.
So the self, for her, required a kind of chemical architecture to sustain its boundaries.
It seems so. And simultaneously, at the Enfield Tennis Academy, the pursuit of competitive excellence requires the constant, active killing and mourning of the self's limitations.
Yet the entire ETA system is defined by the absolute necessity of staying in the game, of returning to the court, even after the tragic loss of a limited self.
So the record leaves us with a profound, unavoidable dichotomy regarding the structure of consciousness and despair in this world. Is the feeling of existential horror Gumpert experiences merely the side effect of stopping a chemical substance that coded as hope, meaning her despair is purely chemical?
Or is it the natural, tragic consequence of facing one's own necessary, limiting self without mediation, which would suggest Shtit's philosophy is merely the competitive, structured version of Gompert's internal war.
A war she lost.
So, we've executed the deep dive, we've documented the essential facts, Catherine Gompert's singular clinical historical link between cannabinoid cessation and profound horror, and Gerhard Schtit's mathematical historical definition of existence as an endless, tragic war against the self.
And the document presents us, and you listening, with the ultimate question of self-governance in this reality. If, as Shtit claims, the true opponent is always the self, and if conquering the self means transcending the boundaries that make play possible, then what is the cost of absolute victory? If you truly eliminate all personal limits, what is left to contain the infinite chaos?